Welcome to the Forge Truth Podcast, where we are building great men as God defines greatness. Forge is a movement of men with a mission to help all men realize they're the deeply beloved, redeemed sons of the Most High God. I'm your producer, Zach, and I'm here to discuss the issues that affect men the most with our two hosts, Dr. Pete Alwinson, lifelong pastor and leader of Forge, and Jason Quinones, Bishop of Core Faith Church in Oviedo, Florida. Men, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here. Here we go.
Yeah, we're
Rock
excited.
and roll.
Yes, we're excited. We're excited to be back in action.
Yeah, and we got different generations around this table.
We do. And I noticed something. I noticed as we were preparing for this, you asked our last guest to stay. And he's a boomer, so I'm wondering, is that characteristic of the boomer generation? You want to gang up on other generations?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
They've always wanted to have numbers, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Man. Yeah. So we welcome you back to help fight for the boomer team.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I came prepared.
But he's right. We're talking about generations today, the generations of men, and what we can glean from that, what that means as far as reaching them for the gospel, discipling them in the family of God, all of those kind of things we're going to talk about. And but before we do, I want to remind everyone, help get the word out about this show by sharing with a friend, by liking, commenting, and subscribing to the podcast where you listen, okay? And if you don't know about it, we're on YouTube too, so you can watch us. You can see us and not just listen to us. If you want, just look the Forge Truth Podcast up on YouTube.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Zach. Well, this whole generation thing is a unique thing. It's really important. We talk about, at Forge, we talk about the different seasons of a man's life. We talk about emerging men, pioneering men, and then full throttle men, guys with kids, and both you two, Zach and Bishop, you guys are full throttle. And then we talk about seasoned men, 55 and above, where a lot of life has already gone by and we're still in the game. But there are different generations of men also in the church. And I think it's important for us to understand something of the generational differences, uniquenesses, and blessings. And one other proverb that we tend to talk about at Forge a lot is the glory of an old man is his gray hair, if he still has any, and the glory of a young man is his strength. Yeah. And how we need each other generation. We need the different generations within the church. And so I don't know, maybe I ought to lay out just real quick some of the generations that we talk about. I'll do that real quick. Yeah. But when we think of it always used to get me, they called them the greatest generation. That was the World War II, born in 1925 to 45. No. And then the baby boomers, Bob's and my generation, 1946 to 1964. Then Generation X, born 1965 to 1980, roughly. Millennials, 1981 to 1996. Gen Z, 1997 to 2012, and then Generation Alpha.
Gen Alpha.
Are we starting over again? Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
2010 to 2025. So really, Jimmy Carter just died in December of 2024. He was 100 years old. Yeah. So there's not many greatest generations still with us, but the boomers we're still around. So what are some uniquenesses about the boomers? What do you think, guys?
Well, one thing I noticed is that you just skipped over the silent generation. Like, they didn't even exist. You didn't even mention them.
Well,
that's part of the joke.
Private joke. That's another name, I think, for the greatest generation.
No, those are separate.
So why? So let me ask you, before we talk about the boomers, so why do they call that generation the silent generation?
I don't know. Why do they?
Nobody knows, because they're silent.
Because they maybe because they didn't really speak up about themselves much and make a name for themselves in any unique way. Yeah. No, that's true. That's right. I missed this. It's the greatest generation, and then the silent generation, 25 to 45. The greatest generation is 1900 to 1925. Yeah.
Yeah.
And typically those were guys that fought World War II, I think, right? Mm. And there's some interesting distinctives about what was influential in all of those generations. I don't know. I'm probably the most ignorant on the silent generation.
Well, so baby boomers, this is my take on it. I'm a millennial, but baby boomers, they grew up in a time of kind of like the heyday of America, right? We had World War II was over, and America is absolutely in its ascendancy as far as world power goes.
Right.
Economically, we're doing amazing. We're a superpower at this point. And so they grew up in, the 50s, which nowadays, if, people are looking back nostalgically, they're thinking about the 50s. And so it was just a exciting and fruitful time to be alive. And so that's the circumstances that they grew up in. And as a consequence, there are a lot of baby boomers. I think for a long time, it was this like huge bulge in the generational
58
numbers.
58 million, or I've heard as high as 78 million. I don't know, but
yeah. And so that's when I think of the baby boomers, I think of that growing up post World War II in kind of like a society that is in its ascendancy.
Yeah, right. So it was kind of a unique time. I mean, the baby boomers were let's make it happen type people, and really after World War II, there was the British Empire basically fell apart. The French were a mess. America was the superpower, and then the Soviet Union was on the rise because Soviet Union. We downplay a lot of Russia, and for various reasons, but it was the Soviet Union that really defeated the Germans in a big way. Now, we helped them, and we did too, but they were the other superpower, and China was not on the rise so much yet. Yeah.
So I would say this. This is probably the weakest area of my life. Any kind of history. You love history. I don't know if that's a Generation X thing that we just. But I just know me. I can't really tell you what defines Generation X. What like makes them special, other than I'm part of them.
Yeah.
And so
it is. That's your generation. And what can we learn about Generation X?
Well, Gen X is at a time, like when I think of music, like that's where alternative rock and grunge and everything are coming from, right? So punk music and all that kind of thing. So these are the people that wanted to distance themselves from the baby boomers, and so it was kind of more like this alternative generation, right? That they're not as interested in like being business moguls or that kind of thing, right? They kind of want to
challenging the norms.
Exactly. Yes.
Rebels, rebelling against.
Yeah, think the end of the Berlin Wall falling down, right? That's Gen X. Nirvana and all those kind of things.
Yeah. There really was and what I know is a lot of the Gen X guys who were on my staff, my Gen X pastors, assistant pastors, they struggled a lot with their dads because their dads, as boomers, were out busy and away and not really that involved, and so a lot of them had a struggle with the male leadership above them, and they struggled to be submissive in leadership under my leadership, and yet I sort of had to carry a father role with them too, even though they tried not to look at me as a father, they still did, and so they struggled with me. Anyway, so that's Gen X, baby boomers, Gen X, and then the millennials come about, 81 through 96. My kids are all millennials, right?
Yeah, and I'm a millennial too. I'm kind of an older millennial, so I'm one of the oldest millennials, which sometimes is even like separate out into its own little micro generation, because really we are the ones that experienced when we were children the shift from analog to digital. So I grew up in school without an email address, without being on the internet, and then in high school is when you get an email address, you get the internet and that kind of thing. And so we are natives to both a non-digital world and a digital world. So going through that transition as kids, and then our defining like moments are like 9/11. The 9/11 attack happened when I was in college. for other millennials in high school or middle school. So that's kind of like the defining moment, the Iraq War, things like that, social media, all of that. For older generations like Gen X or Boomers, social media happened when they're already adults, But for us, social media, we were the first generation where that was part of our childhood.
When I was a kid, I had a transistor radio. Bob, did you have a transistor radio?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So
five transistors.
Man.
Yeah.
And I remember that was a big deal, Mm-hmm. And sort of the kind of a defining moment for me growing up was my dad was a World War II vet, so that still played a big part in that. And then in my younger years, Vietnam War, the Korean War thing was sort of there, but that wasn't as influential for me because my dad wasn't a Korean War vet. He was a World War II vet. But Vietnam influenced a lot of growing up. The moon landing was a big deal as a kind of a defining moment.
Yes,
supposedly 69, but, I'm still...
Supposedly? What does that mean?
Well, didn't really happen. We had to do...
Hold on. What's the over-under on if it happened or not, Pete?
Okay. Well, the bottom line on that is we only have the ability right now to go 1/10 the distance to the moon that we did supposedly in 1969, and it is there are a lot of people who talking about conspiracy theorists. And I talked to a guy who works. I know. You're thinking I'm nuts. I know.
I don't think you're nuts. I'm absorbing it all.
There were a lot of people
taking notes, so I can call you a heretic. No, I'm joking.
But that was a big deal when I was in 1969, the National Jamboree. Frank Borman was broadcast to all of us Boy Scouts, and so that was a big deal. But it's possible.
Yeah.
We got to talk about conspiracies in another podcast.
Oh, that'd be a fun episode to do.
We need to do that.
Well, I know for me growing up, I think one of the biggest memories I have in elementary school was when the Challenger exploded.
Yeah, right.
Because we were all watching that.
Yeah.
And it was like everybody was like, "What just happened?"
I know.
So that was I think that was one of the biggest things. And you talked about like the transition when I was probably 13, 14 is, obviously we weren't affluent. So I don't know, I could have been a little bit behind the ball on this, but we got a Nintendo and I was like, whatever, so it was not, I wasn't super excited about any of that. When I started ministry, I remember checking emails like once a week. It was, and people were like, hey, I sent you an email. And I'm like, okay. So, but now, I'm checking emails once every 10 minutes, or something like that. I get notifications. So definitely those transitions. But I think one of the major markers was that the Challenger. That's probably one of the biggest things that I do recall.
Yeah.
And Gen Z is what came after millennials, and they're the current youth of today. When people think of millennials, they're always thinking of like high schoolers and college students.
They're 30. They're 30 now.
30 and 40 now.
Yeah, 30 and 40. 30 and 40.
It's really Gen Z who are the young people of today.
Right.
And they are the ones that fully grew up in the digital world, right? So they have cell phones from a very young age, and the way they interact with each other is mediated through digital culture. So they're on social media and cell phones and the internet, and that's a huge part of what it's like to grow up as Gen Z. And then the things that they'll be experiencing in their life, like with AI and stuff like that, they're going to be the ones that are the digital natives to those kind of things. And to the older generations, it's going to get crazy how little they understand really the technological possibilities of the future. And Gen Z is going to be a lot more native to that.
I like it. And then what about Generation Alpha, Gen Alpha?
Yeah, my kids are Gen Alpha.
Those are my grandkids.
Yeah, those are my kids.
Yeah, those are my Sunday school
students.
Okay, your Sunday school students.
Yeah. Josiah's Generation Alpha. I was actually, it's funny, I was looking this up the other day before you sent this out, and I was like, what generation are you? And I was excited about Generation Alpha because I'm like, yo, that's pretty great. Get to start over. We just need to pray this generation starts right. Makes things the right way.
Yeah. Anything else that we should know about Generation Alpha? they're babies. They're kids.
Well, they don't. I mean, they're like Zach was saying. I mean, they're definitely raised with all of the technology.
Yours is not a baby, but my up to 2010 to 2025, right?
Yeah.
So I have two that are babies still.
Yeah, Josiah's 11.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's different, you know. I mean, you look at the way the kids they don't play like we used to. They don't engage like we used to. I mean, even you look at them in conversation. I mean, his friends come over the other day. They all like a bunch of people came over for New Year's Eve, and the kids sat down on the couch and they all grabbed their devices and they were going to play together. And I'm like, okay. First of all, are you guys playing together? That's the question, you know, because sometimes they're like on their devices, they're in the room and they're not playing together. And then, you know, they're having conversations on these devices sitting next to each other instead of going outside and grabbing a football or something like that. So definitely different.
It is. Okay, so let's talk about that. So within this idea of fatherhood and grandfatherhood, what are some things that we need to consider in dealing with different generations as fathers and grandfathers? That's one, is to make sure, as you said, that there's more relational interaction. Yeah. One other thing I know is that teenage girls are very, very influenced by social media. Well, all kids are, all youth are. But teenage girls are particularly vulnerable to influencers. And so at what age do you think that should dads and moms allow their kids to use social media?
Well, I just
30.
read 40. I just read a book called The Anxious Generation, and his recommendation in that was kids should not get a cell phone until ninth grade, and they shouldn't be on social media until 16.
Wow.
Yeah. He says it's that there's so much potential for social media to be damaging to individuals before that age that it's just too dangerous.
Yes. The Anxious Generation is the book, and it's a good book. I have it too, and we need to bring that up because there's so much anxiety that that Gen Z are experiencing. Are millennials experiencing that same level of anxiety, or is it mostly Gen Z?
So no, millennials aren't, and you know they're all addicted to their cell phones for sure.
Yep.
But it's because by and large they grew up with during the transition time into this stuff, and so it wasn't there when they're like forming these friendships. So like I played with my friends like in real life, like we actually played together, and then we started to get technology and social media into our lives. Gen Z grew up with this, and so they didn't have that period where like there wasn't a magical device in your hand at all times, And so the allure of that is just it's a dopamine machine, and it's really hard for a young developing mind to overcome. Yeah. So part of the challenge, I think, is the world has changed and it's not going back as far as like these things. And so what is the balance between trying to give the next generation some of the things from our own childhoods, right, that were great, but like no longer really describe the world, like people don't go and throw the football out, and come home only when the dinner bell is rang at home, like that doesn't happen by and large anymore. Should our push be like, well, let's just make that happen for them? Or how do we bring some of our own values into this like new world? That's my question for you guys.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think?
Like you can tell your kid like, nope, you're not gonna have a cell phone and you're not gonna have social media until 16 or 18 or whatever. But every single one of their friends will, and so now you've just forced them to be a social pariah in some ways. So what do you do about that?
It's tough. With Josiah, he has his phone so he can communicate with his friends and communicate with us. It's not, it's only on Wi-Fi, type scenario. I have every single block on planet Earth, so he can't do anything except text certain people, and there's certain games that he can play and stuff like that. So I think that's something that we've done. We've also put limitations on like the time. Okay, so he can play for 2 hours or whatever it is. Like that's it. During the week, just like, hey man, you got schoolwork? No, can't get on any of that. On the weekends, you can do that. So just, try to do that. But realizing also, there's the challenges. Teachers will do assignments where these kids are required to use a phone to take pictures or, to communicate with each other. So then you're stuck in a situation, which is the reason why we decided to use one of my older phones for that. So I think one of the things is realizing, like you said, the technology is what it is, and we have to grow with that, with the boundaries and the protections. But I do think that there also has to be something where there needs to be that ability to engage with each other, whether it's throwing a football, and what I realize is that the moment you say, hey, we're not doing that, he'll be like, hey, let's go throw the football. So it's just, you just take that away, and they want to throw the football. It's not like they don't want to do those things, but you said it. It's this dopamine that is happening. So it's this feeling that they're experiencing. So why get up from playing, a PlayStation or get off my phone? Well, if you have to, then you'll get out there and do those other things. So I think it's creating that balance where you as a dad or as a parent are intentionally, or a grandparent, you're intentionally engaging them and making sure they know how to engage, because that's the other thing. A lot of kids don't even know how to engage. My
right.
wife in a recruiting environment, millennials will come in and they don't, or Gen Z, they'll come in and they don't even know how to interview. They don't know how to engage in a conversation. They don't know how to relate to people. Right. So they're used to texting. One of the guys that he was a pastor locally, and he was with his young adults, and he recognized that, or he was mentioning to me, his young adults would come into their young adult meetings and they would literally sit on their phone and text each other across the room instead of talking. So, I think that it's us creating that space where it's like, no, you got to talk to each other. We've got to engage in dialogue, and even helping them with their friends, where it's not always, hey, we're going to come over and play a video game. No, we're going to come, we're going to actually play.
So fathers need to exercise leadership within the family and get ownership with their wives about that. This is when we talk about the purposes of a man. We're leaders, worker providers, warrior ambassadors. This is an area of leadership that a man has to work out. And my wife and I didn't have to raise our kids with that struggle, but we did with video games, because those were big. And we downplayed them. We limited the time and focused more on outside stuff. And you can do that. You can say no to your kids.
Yeah.
In fact, we must say no at times. Technology is a great servant, but a horrible master. And we need to keep it in the servant role. Good point. All right. What else?
What do you think, Bob?
Well, I remember that transistor radio that I had.
Yeah.
My dad made the mistake of buying me a reel-to-reel tape recorder. It wasn't a 7-inch, it was a 5-inch. It was portable. And I became hooked on the thing. Not to do anything productive with, but to record songs off the radio and put them on reel-to-reel tapes and play them back to myself in my room. And if it hadn't been for swimming, I think I would have grown up just listening to music in my room the same way that kids today can spend all their time on video games. I think each generation has their own distractions.
That's good.
And I think that, what does it say in A Music Man? Idle mind is the devil's playground. And I think that, you need to keep your kids engaged in fruitful endeavors, whether it be sports, whether it be Bible studies, even at a young age. I know that I challenged the kids in my Sunday school class to memorize verses, and I challenged them on it. And all I know is that that's some time that they're spending at home where they're not playing a video game or they're not recording something and playing it back on their MP3 player or whatever it is that the technology is allowing them to do today. But I know that parents have that same opportunity, as do teachers at school, to take and steer and direct children into doing things that are more fruitful with their time.
That's good. And that's just good parenting, isn't it? I think that a lot of parents don't understand how addicted they are to social media and the dopamine hits they're getting. And they're happy with quiet kids.
Yeah, that was as you're saying that. That's another thing too. As parents, it's so easy because you want to do other things.
Yeah,
and it's so easy to say, "Hey, just play on this," and they play on that, and they're not bothering you, and you're able to focus on whatever it is you want to do, whether it's productive or whether it's just a waste of your time as well. So, being active in that, I think, is imperative for parents, to just know, like, hey, I can't just give this to my kids so they're just quiet, because that is inevitably hurting them. It's not helping them. And it teaches them. I looked up Proverbs 18:1, one of my favorite verses. But a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire, rages against all wise judgment. And as Bob was talking, I think that's every generation, right? Like we look. I remember somebody said, we get down on millennials or whatever, but the millennials are just like Gen Z. Every generation is sinful. Every generation has the same thing. We all want to isolate ourselves and just be to ourselves and just do our own thing and not have to, we don't have to deal with folks on stuff. I think that's in us, to want to do that. And so we as parents in this fight, we got to make sure that we don't let our kids just isolate themselves and,
Totally.
Now let's talk about the baby boomers for a second, because I think they have their own unique spiritual challenges as well. From my perspective as a millennial, one of that is, baby boomers are kind of this age that is retiring and living in retirement, and half of the wealth of the world is owned by the boomers. Yeah. So they are they're wealthy. And they look at all the other generations who have less power, because boomers are in positions of power, have less power, less wealth, less opportunity. And the challenge for them is how to transfer that power and wealth well. Because as the baby boomers, start to retire, start to pass away, like these things that they built, like these businesses and these companies, these are going to be transferred to the next generation. But there's
political power.
Yeah, political power, all of these things. So how do they pass those reins well, right? Instead of just kind of trying to hold on to those things for as long as possible.
That's a great point. And we say at Forge, don't retire, rewire. So we're kind of saying to baby boomers, stay in the game in some respects. Whereas I have some millennial friends who say, when are the baby boomers going to get out of the way and give us your roles? Well, that's an interesting dialogue and debate. But you're right. We do need to train leaders to follow us, but not just wholesale give up our roles. We need to let them in and do that with us.
Look at our politics, right? So the last two candidates from the election, both of them are in their late 70s or 80s. Right. Nancy Pelosi is who knows how old, just
older than dirt. She's older than me,
For sure. So if they don't make this transfer well, it's going to happen all at once and not well, and that's going to be an issue.
A couple of the thoughts, and we're coming to the end of our time, but we need. Two thoughts I have particularly. One is that we should not be just attacking the other generations. In the body of Christ, millennials do have a different work focus than we do. And they work differently than boomers do. And so let's stop the criticizing of each other, and let's love each other generationally.
Yes.
Let's understand each other and disciple each other and find out by listening to each other how we can properly motivate and disciple. And I guess the second major point flows right out of that, and that is the older generations really are responsible for going after the younger generations in discipleship. And when I was growing up as a boomer, our way of mentorship was go after those guys who were ahead of us and ask for help. What I've found is that X and millennials, and particularly millennials, won't necessarily come to us and say, hey, could you mentor me? But if I go to them and I say, hey, I'd like to get to know you. Could I spend some time with you? And they go, yeah, okay. And so we older guys are responsible, I think, for going after those younger men and becoming their friends and learning to listen to them and learn from them. And you younger guys and older guys are motivating to me. And we need to keep that in the body of Christ. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and I would just say it to the younger guys as well. Like you said, it's a lot of times they won't come and ask for help, but I think it's because they don't really realize the value that there is in those older guys that they really need them, to seek that wise counsel. These guys that are older, they've been around the block a few times. And so I encourage younger guys to seek out the older generation and really sit down and pursue wisdom in them. As far as from a church perspective, I think the church does a disservice by just becoming completely contemporary and forgetting our roots and where we have come from. We don't want to do that. I heard you praying today when you were wrapping up, and you were talking about Augustine and Luther and Calvin and how all of these men mined these truths that are found in the gospel. And that's generation to generation to generation. And so I would just encourage the younger man not to forget that you need these older guys that may seem stubborn, may seem harsh, may seem rude, may seem like they don't care, but, go ahead and ask, knock on the door.
Amen.
Well, I'm a baby boomer, and I just spent the last 4 years living with my father-in-law, who was part of the silent generation. And he served in Korea in the Navy. He was a UDT who cleared the beaches at Incheon for the invasion there. He became a pastor and served a church for many years, including teaching in Christian education. And the 4 years that he spent with me were invaluable. I mean, up until the time he came to live with me, he was a distant man who I really had very little interaction with. But when he moved in, I spent time with him every day, and it really was a enriching experience for me. It helped me put an awful lot of things in place regarding his service, his knowledge of the Bible, and his knowledge of my wife even helped, picking his brain on, how best to serve her. And so my encouragement to the Gen X and the Millennials and the Gen Zs would be to start picking the brains of the baby boomers as we get older and start leaving this mortal coil.
That's great.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Forge Truth Podcast. If you want to join the conversation, you can email us at forge@forgetruth.com. We would love it if you would leave a comment, subscribe, and share this show with a friend. Help get the word out about the Forge Truth Podcast. Pete, will you leave a challenge for our men today?
Yeah, thank you, men, for being around this table. And I think the challenge is straightforward. We need each other, and we need the different generations in the church. And so let's love each other. Let's get to know each other. Let's iron sharpens iron each other. As the men of the church goes, so goes the church. A church never gets beyond the quality level of its men. And we need each other of all generations.